The moment that still makes my stomach drop happened over roast, chicken and mashed potatoes. Right in the middle of a family dinner I almost didn't attend. My mother set her fork down. My father leaned back in his chair with this smug little smile, and he said, "Tomorrow we're moving into your house." No excuses. They both smirked like they'd just won something, like this was a joke where I was the punchline. My chest went tight, my ears started ringing, and all I could think was, how did my life turn into this? And more importantly, was I wrong for what I ended up doing to stop them? Tell me honestly, because even now, part of me still wonders if I crossed a line or if I finally did what I should have done years ago. To understand why that sentence shattered me, I have to go back to the beginning, because this wasn't just about a house. It was about my entire life, about being the kid who was always expected to give and never ask for anything in return. I grew up as the oldest child in my family, which in our house meant I wasn't really a child at all. I was a third parent, a backup plan, the responsible one. My parents liked to brag about how mature I was, how I never caused trouble, how they could rely on me. What they didn't brag about was how that maturity came from necessity, from learning very early that if I didn't take care of things, no one else would. When I was 10, I was making lunches for my younger siblings. When I was 13, I was helping pay bills with money from part-time jobs. When I was 16, I was listening to my parents fight about money late into the night, silently promising myself that one day I would have a stable life, a place that was mine, where no one could pull the rug out from under me. College was my escape plan. I worked relentlessly, applied for scholarships, and when I finally got accepted, my parents acted proud in public but resentful in private. They complained about how I was abandoning the family, how they needed me around. Even then, there was this unspoken assumption that whatever I achieved was still theirs somehow, that my success would eventually circle back to benefit them. I brushed it off back then, because I was young and hopeful and convinced that distance would fix everything. It didn't. I graduated, got a decent job, and started saving like my life depended on it. Because in a way, it did. I didn't splurge, didn't travel, didn't live like my coworkers did. Every spare dollar went into a savings account labeled house, and every time my parents hinted that they needed money, I sent it, telling myself it was temporary, that once they got back on their feet, things would change. They never did. My parents were terrible with money, always had been. They'd take out loans, buy things they didn't need, and then act shocked when the bills piled up. If I ever questioned it, my mother would get teary and say, "After everything we've done for you," and my father would remind me that family helps family. So I helped over and over again. When they were late on rent, I paid. When the car broke down, I paid. When my siblings needed school supplies, I paid. Every time I told myself, just one more time, just until things stabilize. They never stabilized, but my savings did grow, slowly, painfully, because I refused to let go of my dream. Buying my house was the proudest moment of my life. I still remember standing in the empty living room after closing, the keys heavy in my hand, the smell of fresh paint in the air. It wasn't huge or fancy, but it was mine. For the first time, I felt safe. I felt like I'd built something solid out of years of sacrifice. I didn't even tell my parents, right away, because I wanted to enjoy that feeling, without their opinions. But of course, news travels fast in families like mine. When I finally told them, my mother hugged me a little too tightly and said, "See, all that hard work paid off," in a tone that felt less like praise, and more like a reminder that she'd always expected this from me. At first, everything was fine. They'd visit occasionally, make comments about how nice the place was, how much space there was. My father joked once about how the guest room was bigger than their bedroom, and I laughed it off, not realizing it was a test balloon. Then the hints started. My mother would sigh dramatically and say their landlord was raising rent again. My father would complain about how cramped their place felt. They'd ask questions about my mortgage, my monthly payments, my utility bills, all framed as casual curiosity. I answered without thinking, because that's what I'd always done. I didn't realize I was giving them ammunition. The dinner where everything blew up was supposed to be a simple family gathering. My mom insisted on hosting, said she wanted to celebrate my promotion at work. That alone should have tipped me off, because she rarely celebrated my achievements unless there was something in it for her. I arrived with a bottle of wine and a cautious smile, and for most of the evening, things were normal. Too normal. We ate. We talked about my siblings' lives. My parents complained about their neighbors. and I started to relax. Then dessert came out, and that's when my father cleared his throat and dropped the bomb. He didn't ask. He didn't even pretend it was a discussion. "Tomorrow we're moving into your house," he said. Like he was announcing the weather. My mother nodded along, that smirk on her face like she was daring me to object. I laughed nervously at first, waiting for the punchline, but it never came. "You're serious?" I asked, my voice already shaking. My mother rolled her eyes and said, "Of course we are. Our lease is ending, and it just makes sense. You have all that space, and we're family." I tried to explain that I wasn't ready for that I'd worked hard for my independence, that I needed my own space. My father cut me off. "No excuses," he repeated. "After everything we've done for you, this is the least you can do." Something in me snapped right then, but I didn't explode. Not yet. Years of conditioning kicked in, and I swallowed my anger, nodded, and said I needed to think about logistics. They took that as agreement. They talked about which room they'd take, how they'd rearrange my furniture, what rules they'd set. They spoke like the decision was already made, like my house was theirs by default. I drove home that night in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles hurt, replaying the conversation over and over. I felt trapped, like a kid again, backed into a corner by people who knew exactly how to manipulate me. I barely slept. Every scenario I imagined ended with me miserable in my own home, walking on eggshells, losing the one thing I'd built for myself. By morning, fear had turned into anger, and anger into resolve. I realized that if I let this happen, it would never stop. They'd move in, take over, and I'd be right back where I started. Except now I'd be paying the mortgage on my own prison. So I decided to do something I'd never done before. I decided to say no, and not just say it, but enforce it. I called my parents and told them calmly that they could not move in with me, that I loved them, but this was my home, and I needed boundaries. The explosion on the other end of the line was immediate. My mother cried, accused me of being selfish, of abandoning them. My father yelled, said I was ungrateful, that they'd given up so much for me. I hung up shaking, but also feeling this strange sense of clarity. For the first time, I hadn't backed down. What happened next is where things get complicated, and this is the part where I really want you to stop and think about what you would have done in my place, because after I said no, they didn't accept it. They showed up at my house the next day with boxes, actual boxes. My heart dropped when I saw their car in my driveway. I stood in the doorway, while my father started unloading. The trunk like this was a done deal. My mother tried to push past me, saying, "Move, you're blocking the door." That's when I realized words weren't going to be enough. I had to choose between protecting myself or giving in to keep the peace. So before I tell you what I did next, pause for a second and ask yourself, if your parents showed up to take over your home after you said no, what would you do? I told them they needed to leave. When they laughed, I told them I would call the police. Saying that out loud felt surreal, like I was watching someone else speak, but I meant it. My father called my bluff, stepped closer, and said, "You wouldn't dare." My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone, but I dialed anyway. The look on his face when he realized I was serious is something I'll never forget. It wasn't just anger. It was disbelief. How dare I defy him like this? How dare I involve outsiders in a family matter? The police arrived and the situation escalated quickly. My parents played the victims, told them I was overreacting, that they were just visiting. I showed the messages, explained everything, and eventually, the officers told them they needed to leave. My mother sobbed dramatically. My father glared at me like I'd committed the ultimate betrayal. When they drove away, I collapsed on the couch and cried harder than I had in years. I felt guilty, relieved, terrified, and free all at once. The aftermath was brutal. My phone blew up with messages from relatives calling me heartless, saying I'd embarrassed my parents. My siblings were split. Some understood. Others sided with my parents. For weeks, I questioned myself constantly. Had I gone too far? Should I have handled it differently? But every time I walked through my quiet house, every time I woke up without tension in my chest, I knew I'd made the right choice for me. My parents eventually found another place to live, though they made sure I knew how. Much harder it was because I wouldn't help. Our relationship is strained now, polite but distant. They don't smirk anymore when they talk to me. They're careful, almost wary. And while that makes me sad, it also tells me something changed for the better. They finally see me as an adult, not an extension of themselves. Looking back, I realize this story isn't just about a house. It's about boundaries, about the cost of always being the responsible one, about the courage it takes to disappoint people who expect everything from you. If there's a lesson here, it's that saying no doesn't make you a bad person, even when the people you're saying no to are your parents. Sometimes, protecting your peace means being the villain in someone else's story. So that's my mess laid out for all of you. If you were on my side, like this video, if you think I was wrong, tell me why in the comments, because I genuinely want to hear different perspectives. Subscribe for more stories like this, and share your final thoughts on this whole situation below. I'll see you all in the next story.